This week's feature car belongs to Denny Deal from Peoria, Arizona, and is a perfect example of one man's love for a car that he's had for over 40 years now. During that time, he raised a family and had a career that took him to various different cities. All the while, he still managed to continually improve and update his car throughout that time, to the final representation of what you see here today. Participating in GTO club functions throughout the country and maintaining his car both cosmetically and mechanically over the past 4 decades. This car has had an amazing and inspiring story that I know you'll enjoy. Now retired, Denny still cares for this stunning example of a 1965 Pontiac GTO, a real and documented car by the way, so that it can be driven reliably to local cruise nights or even cross-country trips to the latest gathering of the GTO faithful. Denny's car is one that hits on all 8 cylinders. A legendary car, perfect color, mint interior, killer stance, the appropriate Day 2 components like wheels and tires, a 389 cubic inch engine with tri-power carburation, a manual 4-speed transmission. It's fully sorted and still has a gentleman who loves being this American muscle car's owner. I'll give you a rundown on how the Pontiac GTO came to be. I'll make it brief because I think even newbie car enthusiasts have heard the story. By the early 1960s, it was becoming obvious to the automakers that many young people would soon come of age and want their own cars. Exciting cars that were beautifully styled with many options to personalize it for each individual buyer, along with exhilarating performance where multiple carbs, manual transmissions, steep axle ratios, and unique names and color choices were specifically developed to appeal to this up-and-coming generation. They were defining their own subculture, which was very different from their parents, with rock and roll music and such things as obtaining a college education and serving honorably in an unpopular war, or protesting it, depending on one's politics. For many, they'd be the first in their lineage to get a college degree and take a different career path than their fathers, who were oftentimes blue-collar workers. In the early 1960s, every American car manufacturer was now cultivating new models for this youth market. Names like Mustang, Torino, Cougar, Cyclone, Grand Sport, 442, Trans Am, GTO, Chevelle, Super Sport, Barracuda, Roadrunner, GTX, Javelin, and AMX would go on to summarize this decade's second half as the most exciting in automotive history. But of all of these models, one stands out among the rest: GTO. Originally conceived by a few men at GM's Pontiac division at the time, the idea was to take an existing model and offer a performance option package rather than a standalone model. This would circumvent bans placed on GM divisions for engine size in certain intermediate and compact cars. At Pontiac, John DeLorean was the chief engineer of the new project, along with Bunky Knudsen, Russell G., and Bill Collins. The president of Pontiac at the time was Pete Estes, who gave the project his blessing from the start. However, the final key to this car's runaway, nearly instant success can be credited to Jim Wangers at Pontiac's advertising agency of McManus, John, and Adams. It was decided that the car should be based on an existing intermediate model, the Le Mans, and be outfitted with a standard 389 cubic inch engine, first seen in 1959, along with other performance, styling, appearance, comfort, and convenience options that would bring throngs of buyers into Pontiac dealers nationwide to buy a car that could easily be built for each customer's idea of what his or her dream car would be. The team needed an exciting and unforgettable name for this new option, so they turned to the historic race cars that had run at Le Mans in France. The perfect name was a derivative of the Ferrari 250 GTO, or Gran Turismo Omologato. Initially, they expected to sell about 5,000 units between 3 different body styles, but when sales skyrocketed to 32,450 by the end of 1964, the bean counters at GM were impressed, to say the least. Going into the 1965 model year, the GTO would continue to be an option on the Pontiac Le Mans, and sales of the 3 available body styles hit 75,342. The car's dimensions were slightly larger than the previous year by 3 inches, although wheelbase remained the same. The 65s were about 100 pounds heavier and featured many changes from their year before counterparts, some obvious and some very subtle. The first AM/FM radio was offered this year. The 1965 Pontiac lineup so impressed the editors at Motor Trend magazine that they selected the entire offerings from the company for their coveted Car of the Year award. Pontiac began its storied history in 1926, and during the 1965 model year, a gold Catalina 4-door hardtop was officially declared as the 10 millionth Pontiac built, undoubtedly thanks in large part to the phenomenal success of the GTO. GTO sales continued to accelerate into 1966, reaching nearly 100,000 units by year's end, despite the car now having direct competition from other GM divisions, as well as models from Ford, Chrysler, and even AMC. A big engine and a lighter body was not a new concept. It just took the dream team at Pontiac at the time to make it all happen. In 1966, the GTO became its own model, and the car had definitely become ingrained in the culture of America, with a hit song, various merchandise, and even a Dean Jeffries customized GTO for the hit TV series The Monkees. The 1964 and 65 GTOs can easily be documented as having left the factory with the GTO package by contacting Pontiac Historical Services via email, snail mail, or fax. They are not currently accepting telephone orders or inquiries. If you're looking at purchasing one of these legendary Pontiacs, it's highly recommended that you contact them if you're buying or selling a car. It's also a good idea to have this documentation on hand so that any potential buyer can put their mind at ease that they are in fact looking at a documented GTO. I think clones or replicas of these Pontiac muscle cars are cool, but to pass one off as a real car, whether doing so knowingly or not, is fraudulent. So, buyer beware. The info is readily available, it just needs to be sought out. Now, I'll let Denny tell you about his gorgeous example of a highly desirable and coveted GTO from the muscle-laden 1960s. This is truly a real love story between man and machine.
Hi there, my name is Denny Deal, and I live in Peoria, Arizona. Originally from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, via Miami, Florida, via Denver, Colorado, via Seattle, Washington. And I own a 1965 Pontiac GTO. It is a Martinique Blue 389 Tri-Power 4-speed car that I've had for almost 40 years. I first got into GTOs when I came back from Vietnam back in 1967. I was stationed at Fort Carson, Colorado, and I was tired of walking. I told a buddy of mine we needed to get on a bus, go to Denver, because I couldn't find the car I wanted in Colorado Springs. We ended up going to Denver, found a Pontiac dealer, and the guy talked me into buying a 65 GTO red 3-speed tri-power car. I drove the vehicle back to Colorado Springs, had it for about 3 weeks, but wasn't overly impressed with the car. They talked about the tri-power and how performance-oriented it was, but anyway, I got a call one day from the dealer, and he indicated my financing didn't go through and he needed a couple $100 more. I told him I didn't have the money, and he said, borrow it from your parents, and I said, I don't do that. So he says, you got to bring the car back. So on the way back, I was going up Nevada Avenue in Colorado Springs, getting on I-25 northbound to get to Denver. And there was a tractor trailer coming. And for the first time, I kicked it and the tri-power hooked up. And I must have gotten off a dozen times before I got to Denver just to kick it in again and again and again. And I knew then I wanted a GTO. I ended up turning the car back to them, took a leave with the military and went down to Miami, Florida. And I found a 1965 Night Watch Blue 4-speed car down in Miami. It wasn't a tri-power, but it was a 4-barrel and it was a GTO. And I ended up driving it back to Colorado. And I had that car for approximately probably about 2 years. We had moved after I got out of the service. I ended up moving back to Miami, Florida. My wife flew down, I drove the car down. And we were there about 6 months and the car was stolen. And right outside, I heard the car start. It was right next to our bedroom window. We had the air conditioner on, but it didn't wake me up. And I bet you I walked around that apartment building 20 times the next morning looking for my car, and it was gone. Now, the interesting thing is that while they didn't find it for 3 or 4 weeks, we needed transportation. I ended up buying a 61 Impala bubble top, which was kind of a unique car in itself. You don't see a whole lot. It was only Chevrolet did the bubble tops for 2 years, 61 and 62. I ended up selling that and buying a 67 RSSS Camaro, 350 4-speed car. And while it was a neat car, it wasn't a GTO. It didn't run like a GTO, it didn't pull like a GTO, it wasn't as comfortable as a GTO, and I knew that was temporary. And we had moved to Denver from Miami, and this was about 10 years later, and I told my wife that I need a hobby. We had gotten rid of the Camaro, we bought a nice Malibu, good family car, and she was going through the paper and she found a 65 GTO for sale not too far from where we lived. So I ended up calling the guy up, and he says, I've already got an offer on it. He was asking $1,100. The guy says he's already offered $1,100, but if you want to come over and take a look at it, bring the money with you. He says, and you can beat that price. He says, I'll sell you the car. So I went over, took a look at it, and saw that it had a good enough structure. It wasn't the prettiest car. It was burgundy with white interior. The burgundy paint had faded quite a bit. The white interior looked like somebody had opened the door and threw a hand grenade in. The headliner was hanging, the seats were all gutted out, but it was a 4-speed car. It was a 389, but with another 4-barrel. The guy said he wanted $1,100 or better. I offered him $1,110. He said sold. So I ended up driving the car home on all 6 cylinders, and that was the start of it, and that was in 1980. So here we are 40 years later, and there probably isn't anything I haven't done to this car. I've chromed both bumpers, I've replaced a lot of parts. I purchased at least 6 GTOs over the years, 65, 66 GTOs that I could use for parts. Got a tri-power out of a nice 66 GTO that's on there now. I've done the suspension, I've put disc brakes on the front, I've put 15-inch Kragers on it, I've put 2.5-inch aluminum exhaust with the 50 series Flowmasters, KYB gas shocks, and it has been the love of my life for all those years. And I built it to be a road car. I have driven this to 5 different GTO nationals around the country. First one was in Denver when I lived there, and our club hosted the event, so it wasn't a big deal. The second time I drove to Denver was from Seattle. That was about a 3,000-mile round trip. And then the third time was from Phoenix to Denver, and that was about 2016, I think it was 2016. And I also drove it from Denver to Wichita and Denver to Detroit. So this has been a great road car. I've had limited problems, issues, or concerns with it. It's treated me very, very well. It's been a little tricky at times trying to figure out what is going on, but you know, there's probably not a nut or a bolt on this car that I haven't turned at least once. So, I like the way it looks. I like getting the thumbs up when I'm driving down the highway. I enjoy the sound of the car. It's a strong running car. At the same time, I will probably never get rid of the car, and I just plan on keeping it until the cows come home, I guess. Here, our local chapter, the Cactus GTO Club, and I am also a member of the GTO Association of America. The GTO AA had indicated that they were putting together a rally from Springfield, Illinois, running the Route 66 tour all the way to Kingman, Arizona. And I indicated that we would like to meet them in Flagstaff, Arizona with a number of our car club members, and then go on to Williams and to Kingman with them. One of the things that our club did is we set up a banquet dinner in Kingman with a restaurant there. And we actually paid for the dinner for them to come all the way out there, and they really appreciated that. But at that dinner, we had a guy from Flagstaff. He's a GTO aficionado, and he goes to a lot of car auctions and critiques a lot of the individual cars in regards to how they're set up, the things that they have on them, and what's right and what's wrong. And during we had him speak during our dinner, and one of the things he commented on, he says, is the amazing array of modifications that people make to tri-powers on their cars. They'll be running a car through an auction. It's a tri-power car, but they've got wrong carburetors. They don't have the right linkage. They've got garden hosing for fuel lines. It's just amazing. And he says, I gotta admit, he says, there's one car in this group here who's got the almost perfect 66 GTO tri-power, and that's Denny Deal. He said the only thing he's missing, he says, he's got a 90-degree fitting on the rear fuel line that should be a 45-degree fitting, but he says other than that, he says it's perfect. So I'm taking that, and I got that 66 from a guy who was in the military, and he had left the car at Grandma's house. I happened to see it one day going home from work, stopped, talked to Grandma, left a business card, and 2 or 3 or 4 or 5, 6 months later, I got a phone call. I went down and talked to him. I ended up buying the car. But he didn't indicate that there was a tri-power on the car. He just said that the engine was in the trunk and he had blown it up. So I bought the car anyway for $300, nice 66 gold GTO, and partnered up with a friend of mine who had a 66 GTO that wanted some parts. And we ended up jimmy opening the trunk, and there was the tri-power. And I remember it goes back to the first 65 I had that I had to take back to the dealer, the tri-power, the way it sounded, the way it kicked in. I took the tri-power and I told my buddy he can have the rest of the car. So that's how the 66 tri-power ended up on my 65. Cars to some people are like family or pets. The longer you keep them, the harder it is to part with them. I doubt I will ever part with this car, especially as long as there are warm summer nights, and we have plenty of those here in Arizona, and car shows to go to, and to meet old and new friends, and to swap stories. So thank you very much.
I'd like to thank Denny for sharing his amazing 65 GTO with all of us. Denny and I met in Denver in 1983 when I first entered the classic car hobby with my newly acquired 1966 Ford Fairlane GTA hardtop. I didn't have a club to run with, and it was Denny and another member, Chris, who invited me to participate in various events that the club would put on. I distinctly remember the two of them saying, GTO or GTA, hey, it's only one letter. Come join us. I have many fond memories of those days and how cool car people really are. Now, all these years later, we both live in the Phoenix area and recently reunited at a local car show. Thanks Denny and Chris for all the memories. Although my Fairlane is long gone, those happy recollections will always stay with me. If you like this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button so you never miss my weekly videos. I also welcome your comments. If you have a vehicle with a fascinating story that you'd like me to showcase, you can email me at ifthiscarcouldtalk@gmail.com. Maybe you'll see it here and share your story with the world. Until next time.